Thank you, everyone. So we are going to have our next speaker, Deeksha Sharma. Deeksha is a law student at the National Law University, India. She is working with SDG Society, IIT Madras, and the United States Department of the State as a member of COVID-19 India study. She would like to give a talk about the water scarcity and policy in India. Welcome, Ms. Sharma.
Thank you so much. Right. So greetings everyone. My name is Deeksha Sharma. I'm a penultimate year law student from India. I'm currently working as a legal intern with Toyota Connected Europe and as a contributor and researcher for PathCheck by Massachusetts Institute of Technology. So before going further with my presentation, I would like to ask everyone two questions. And I would want everyone to think of their answers in their minds. How much water do we eat each day? Perhaps all of you must be wondering that we do not eat water, we drink water, and that I might have not learned quite well in my elementary classes. But I'll again ask you that question. How much water do we eat each day? Giving you an estimate answer, we humans, or rather I should say, we lucky citizens of the world, eat approximately 3,500 liters of water each day. I know that sounds really shocking. Moving on to the second question. Vanya, could you just change the slide? Right. You see the picture of two apples on your screen. If I might ask you the key pointers or key indicators that you would keep in mind before buying any one of them. Perhaps to answer for you, you would think about the price, its freshness, whether the product is organic or not, whether it looks ugly or it looks bad. And you might come to the conclusion that both of these apples are fairly same. And if you buy one, you might not end up buying the other. But I would say that both these apples are really different. How? One of these apples might have a huge environmental impact while the other might not. Or, in other words, to be really specific, one might have used a large amount of water in the production process while the other might have not. Vanya, could you just share the screen? As you can clearly see here, one of the apples is dancing and the other is overflowing with water. I'm sure most of you must have got a glimpse of my presentation today. I'll be talking about the water used in the production process, or in other words, the hidden water or virtual water, water footprint, and its implementation in international law. But wait, most of you must be wondering that the place you come from is not facing water scarcity right now or will not be facing water scarcity in the near future. Then why should we care about it? Scientists have suggested that the essence of global water scarcity, one of the most crucial encounters for sustainability, is the geographical mismatch between freshwater demand and availability, severely affecting human security. So, this escalates the need for market-smart water policies targeting the comparative advantage of states. And above all, we are citizens of the world, and it is our duty to take the world towards United Nations Sustainable Development Goals by the year 2030. And what's easier than transporting water from water-rich countries to water-poor countries in the form of goods, rather than taking the pain of transporting it through pipelines, trucks, or ships? Now I want all of you to understand three important definitions here. Next slide, please. As you can see on the screen, water footprint. It's similar to carbon footprint. It's basically the amount of pressure put on the freshwater resources of a particular area. Next slide, please. With this, we come to the product water footprint. Product water footprint is the amount of pressure a single product puts on the freshwater resources of a particular area. As you can clearly see right now, the product water footprint of a pair of jeans is 8,000 liters of water. And I'm sure most of us must be wearing those 8,000 liters of water right now. Next slide, please. The product water footprint, as you can clearly see here, of half a liter Coca-Cola bottle is 175 liters of water. Now let's come to another aspect. What is a business water footprint? Next slide, please. Business water footprint is the amount of pressure put by an entire business or any of its subsidiaries on the freshwater resources of a particular area. As you can clearly see here right now, LG is the first company to have its business water footprint certified. Now, I want all of you to remember one principle while we move ahead with this presentation. Water-rich countries export water-intensive goods to water-poor countries, helping them in their food security and also helping them overcome the problem of water scarcity. Next slide, please. Now let's move on to international trade law. Next slide. International trade law is the body of law that regulates the trade between countries and also helps to liberalize it. There are two key agreements here for us to understand: the General Agreement on Trade and Tariff and the Technical Barriers to Trade Agreement. The General Agreement on Trade and Tariff is an international agreement that regulates the flow of goods between countries. And the Technical Barriers to Trade Agreement is an international agreement that checks if the technical regulations and standards as have been imposed by one country on the other do not become a barrier to trade. So this can be technical regulation to protect one's own natural resources and technical regulation for poverty alleviation. Let's understand the meaning of process and production methods. As the name clearly suggests, these are methods of production used to produce a particular product. Now, these are divided into two categories: product-related process and production methods and non-product-related process and production methods. PRPPMs, as the name suggests, are those methods of production which have a significant influence over the product quality, its physical or other characteristics. And NPR-PPMs, as the name suggests, are those methods of production that do not influence the product quality or its physical or other characteristics. Now, giving you an example and moving previously to the apple example. All those things like whether the apple is organic or not, whether it's fresh, and whether it is beautiful or it's ugly, all come under the purview of PRPPMs. But something like the environmental impact, the amount of water it uses in the production process, all that comes under NPRPPMs. And I'm sure most of you have guessed it right. Our entire debate comes under those NPRPPMs. In the past, the World Trade Organization had been really adamant regarding the definition of likeness. It said that two products can only be called unlike only when there's a visible difference between them, something like physical characteristics or other characteristics. And so that is the reason the technical barriers to trade allow technical regulations only related to PRPPMs, that is product-related PPMs. But of late, the WTO has changed its interpretation of likeness. It says that a consumer's choice and preferences also influence likeness, and what a consumer thinks are perfect substitutes of each other. But how would I as a consumer come to know that this particular product is environment friendly and this is not environmentally friendly? It is only through eco-labels will I come to know the difference between these two products. Now, what are eco-labels? Eco-labels are essentially such labels which tell us if a product is environment friendly or animal friendly or basically nature friendly. Now, there's a big dispute going on in the World Trade Organization regarding the legal status of these previous slide, please. Sorry, the previous slide. Now, there's a big debate going on in the World Trade Organization regarding the status of these NPR PPMs, or rather, I should say the eco-labels for NPR PPMs under the World Trade Organization. But of late, as I told you previously, World Trade Organization has shifted its approach. I'll tell you three important cases here. As you can clearly see on the screen, the tuna dolphin case, shrimp turtle case, and EC seal case for the protection of dolphins, turtles, and seals, respectively, have actually laid the foundation of a new legal scholarship in this particular area. If I summarize all the cases and give you four important points due to the paucity of time, these are as follows. First, the WTO even allowed NPR PPMs to influence likeness between products. Also, how would NPR PPMs in this particular situation influence likeness between products? It is only through sustainable farming techniques or sustainable fishing techniques that WTO said that they could actually influence likeness. Also, the WTO interpreted the term exhaustible natural resources in the General Agreement on Trade and Tariff to not only mean natural resources like air and water, but also to mean natural resources like animals which are endangered or about to get extinct. The WTO said that it has its duty for sustainable development, and it is only through NPR PPMs would it be able to fulfill that. Now, how did WTO come to this solution all of a sudden? How did it change its attitude from being adamant for likeness to being really open to also include NPR PPMs? It is through Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties. Next slide, please. Next one. The next one. Right. As you can clearly see on the screen, the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties is an international agreement that establishes a comprehensive rules and procedures that help us to interpret the age-old treaties with contemporary times. Why age-old? You must be knowing that the entire foundation of public international law or international law per se was made at a time when people could not comprehend the 21st century climate change concerns of states, or concerns like sea level rise or climate refugees for that matter. So to actually adjust those age-old treaties with our times today, we have to interpret them. So there's something known as the evolutive interpretation of treaties that helps us to interpret treaties in contemporary times. The WTO did exactly that. It interpreted the GATT and TBT with the help of international environmental law, multilateral environmental agreements, the Convention on Biological Diversity, the Convention on Migratory Species, CITES, and other agreements per se. Now, next slide, please. Now, do you think that this entire debate of related and unrelated and World Trade Organization has actually become really irrelevant after these three cases? Because earlier, they were actually differentiating the physical characteristics of a product with ecological and social concerns. And now that the WTO has laid a new foundation for this entire debate is irrelevant. Now let's come back to the point where we started. Water footprint is the amount of pressure put by a particular product on the freshwater resources of a particular area. So let's move on to international investment law with this principle in mind. Next slide, please. International investment law is the field of international law that governs relationship between states and foreign investors. So most of us must have heard of farmland investments. These are investments made into buying agricultural land that would be used for agricultural purposes. So essentially, water security is one of the essentials for farmland investment. Among factors like water security, effective climate, and cheaper land grabbing in Africa is putting the water security of host states at a big risk. Scientists have suggested that if the entire agricultural land in Africa is given to foreign investors, it would be termed as a hydrological suicide, because the amount of water that would be required for these agricultural lands is much more than that is available in the entire Nile River basin. And I'm sure most of you must have heard about the conflicts going over the Nile River basin. Next slide, please. As you can clearly see here right now, almost 50% of Africa is actually grabbed by foreign investors. So can we come to this conclusion that international investment law that governs these farmland investments is only investor friendly? I would say yes, and I would divide my argument into 3 points. Next slide, please. Going with the first argument, that is economic freedom. So economic freedom forms the soul and base of bilateral investment treaties, or in simpler words, the investment agreements between the host government and the foreign investors for any kind of investment. So economic freedom allocates resources from the resourceful poor nations to developed countries without taking into consideration the significance of those lands for host communities. Going with the second argument, there are 2 legal clauses in these bilateral investment treaties which are very investor friendly and go against the rights of host governments. What are they? Prohibition against expropriation without compensation. This essentially means that the host government cannot take away property rights of foreign investors in any situation. The next, fair and equitable treatment standard. This means that the host government has to treat the foreign investor according to the benchmark that has been set under international law, which I tell you is really high. Giving you an example for this situation, even in cases of drought, the host government has to ensure continuous access to water to foreign investors and has to put the economic and selfish interests of foreign investors over the human interests of its own population. There was a very famous case regarding this, that is Vattenfall versus Germany in 2009. Vattenfall is a Swedish multinational company that provides power access to a number of EU states. So in 2009, Germany implemented a new set of environmental laws. Vattenfall, because it thought that those laws were really strict to abide by, started investor state claims under international investment law against Germany, saying that these environmental laws are essentially expropriation, are taking away our rights, and you are basically treating us not according to the fair and equitable treatment that has been set under international law. Germany's environmental minister, in a press conference following this suit, said that we are being targeted just for implementing ours and EU's laws in Germany. This brings me to the third argument. The property rights, or rather I should say the property laws in developing and the least developed countries are really weak, which makes them really prone to misuse by these selfish investors. So as we previously learned the concept of water footprint, so can we easily say that the water footprint of any product grown in Africa is really huge? But there might be some solutions for the same. Next slide, please. Vienna Convention comes here again. The evolutive interpretation of the bilateral investment treaties would help us to not only grant the host government with the right to water, but also allow it to save its water for its own citizens. How? If we interpret it with international freshwater law and international environmental law. Now, considering this major fact that all these farmland investments are made on land which is very near to international watercourses, so as to ensure a continuous access to water, international freshwater law paves its way in. International freshwater law says that the host government has to consult the neighboring states, the states that are actually dependent upon that international watercourse, before approving such a farmland investment. International environmental law says that if the host government thinks that any farmland investment would have a transboundary harm on the neighboring states, it would first have to consult those states before approving this farmland investment. And the International Court of Justice has actually repeated this principle in a lot of judgments. Now let's come to the second solution, the Agreement on Agriculture. Next slide, please. The Agreement on Agriculture is an international agreement that regulates the flow of agricultural goods between countries. There's something known as green box subsidies in Agreement on Agriculture. These are those subsidies which are made for environmental purposes or for research or pest or disease control purposes, but have no influence or are not basically a barrier to international trade. But before that, let's understand what enlightened subsidies are. Enlightened subsidies are again a concept of Agreement on Agriculture, but these are tax credits given to anybody who is using renewables. Now, if this concept of tax credit is put into the green box subsidies, it would not only be beneficial for the host government to maintain its right to water for its citizens, but also for the foreign investor, because he would be getting a lot of tax credits from these host governments while only respecting the right to water of the host government. With this, I come to the end of my presentation, but before leaving, I'll show you what exactly we lucky citizens of the world are doing each day. Next slide, please. This is exactly what we are doing each day. What are the solutions apart from international law? What is that we individuals can do? Next slide, please. We can urge our own governments through civil society organizations and NGOs to have virtual water in their trade policies. As of now, United States of America has that. Next slide, please. We can also check for such eco-labels on products. These could be anything for the protection of environment to protection of one particular animal. Like you might be really aware of dolphin safe eco labels going on in the United States of America as of now. Next slide, please. Make a commitment to not throw away fruits and vegetables just because of their ugliness, because you are actually wasting a lot of water. Next slide, please. And the last solution, and the most important one, we consumers have a very important power with ourselves that can take down unsustainable companies. And what is that? Our purchasing power. Please utilize it really properly. It's no time to think. It's no time to ponder. It's time to do some action. It's time to actually become your children's guardian angels. Do not let your grandkids curse you whilst you enjoy the bitter fruits of your destruction in heaven. Make a commitment. Thank you. We can move on to the last slide. Next slide. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Deeksha. We have two questions for you from our audiences. The question is, what's your thought on the water equity and water sanitation in developing countries? Is there any challenges and potential business opportunity?
Could you please repeat the first part of the question?
Um, okay. So
If I
what's
can
your,
see it in this
can you
transition.
see? Can you see in the question and answer box? Is what's your thoughts on water equity and the water sanitation in developing countries?
Right. So as of the moment, India has such regulations, but I wouldn't say that these regulations are on paper. These regulations are mutual regulations between states. Because if I talk about my state at the moment, it is a very water scarce state, and so it does not grow crops like maize and rice and water intensive crops. Basically, we import them from other water rich states. So this practice is this concept is in practice as of the moment in India, but it's not on paper. And that is why a lot of NGOs and civil society organizations are urging the Indian government to have that on paper, so that good estimates and good calculation is done regarding the virtual water footprint of each crop in India and what can be done about that. And also there was this particular thing going on with one of the what do I say NGO or a civil society organization here in India, because the world is moving towards electric vehicles, and so for that we need a large amount of lithium. Now lithium is grown. Lithium basically is found in water poor countries like Chile, Philippines, and China, and so this organization was trying to have a virtual water trade policy with China so as to import lithium from China, but quantify that in terms of the water we are importing and exporting to each other. If that answers your question.
Yes. We also have another question from the audience is how do we advocate such regulation changes in developing countries?
Like I previously mentioned, we could advocate such regulations through NGOs and civil society organizations, and that this organization that I previously mentioned in the previous answer is doing. It's urging the Indian government, along with that, the Chinese government, to have a virtual water trade concept for import and export of minerals, because lithium uses a large amount of water not only for extraction, but it's a big water pollutant. So that would solve two purposes if we have it not only in India, but also as multilateral agreements with countries. If that answers your question.
Yes. So please stay here for another 10 minutes. I think our audiences may have another question coming later, and you can feel free to answer the question using the Q&A chat box and then type in the answer.
Thank you so much.